What if I told you that your low back pain in your golf swing is actually due to your hip mobility or maybe some lower body mobility that you know nothing about? Well, that can be the case for a lot of golfers, and it's actually not that hard to fix. We just have to screen properly and find out what might be causing the issue. So most people, when they lack, let's say, internal rotation of the hip, the ability to get over into this hip, then they have to get that rotation from something else, right? So when I'm set up, if I go into my backswing and this hip hits the brakes and stops, I'm not gonna stop my backswing right here. I'm gonna try to get back farther, but now what am I doing? I'm turning all through my lumbar spine, which is down low, cue the low back pain. So is it the low back's fault? No, it's actually the hip's fault, or maybe even farther down the stream at the foot. Now, what we do at THP is we screen for all types of different things, but today we're gonna talk about lower body mobility screening when it comes to the sport of golf. We're gonna talk about 3 specific screens that give us the most bang for our buck. So we screen the ankle, okay? We screen the hips, and then we screen the posterior chain, which is your glute, your hamstring, all the way down to the calf. So we wanna see how much mobility we have in those different joints, because if one of them is causing us an issue, it can actually go up the chain and cause some problems in the low back, in the shoulder, because we're doing so much rotation at such high speeds, anything that's a little bit off can really cause a problem. So what we're gonna do today, we're gonna talk about the 3 screens, like I said, the ankle, the hips, and the posterior chain. We're gonna talk about how they actually interact with the golf swing and how to screen them and what we're looking for. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about training in terms of what's going on once we find the problem, how do we address it? Okay, so let's go into the first screen. First screen, we're actually gonna go down. We're gonna go to a half kneeling position. We're gonna look at your ankle mobility. Now, a lot of times at THP, what we'll do is we'll actually do this in shoes. The reason for that is because a lot of people, golf in shoes, right? So we actually want to see what their ankle mobility looks like in the shoe. Now the problem with that is you can tell on my shoe it is pretty flat, but I do get a little bit of a heel lift out here. So when we want to take the ankle out of the equation, we pop the heel up. So if I have limited ankle mobility, when I train, I can pop the heel up, and normally I can get a little bit more depth at my hip or my knee. So with that being said, if you want true ankle mobility, you want to pop out of the shoe. But remember, we're looking to see what is your ankle mobility when you're in the sport. So we're gonna actually have you have shoes on. If we can be in your golf spikes, that's great. So to test the ankle, there's a couple different ways we do it at THP, but this is more to test true ankle mobility. We're gonna go ahead and do about 4 fingers from the toe, and I'm gonna put my golf club right there. Now, realistically, if I'm getting tested, someone else is gonna hold this so that we're making sure that it's vertical and not going too far toward the knee or too far away from the knee. But once you have about that set, make sure this is about vertical, and I'm just gonna drive my knee as far forward as I can. So you can see I can just about get there, and my heel is staying on the ground. Okay, so when I go down, I push, and if I can make it there, that would mean I pass. So my knee can go about, maybe 2 inches past my toe. So that's gonna tell me that on that left side, I can actually get into it. Now, let's look at that, and we pop the shoe off. So popping the shoe off, we set up the exact same way. And now from here, I'm gonna go ahead and go forward, and we see I'm a little more limited. Now that heel's coming up. Okay, so again, true ankle mobility with my shoe off, I'm having a tougher time keeping that heel planted. But once I get into the shoe, it gets a little bit easier. So in retrospect, when you're thinking about it, you have to test both. But if you're gonna test one, I'd rather test in the shoe, because that's how the person's gonna actually be on the course. So the other thing that we're gonna ask when we test our ankle mobility is, where do you feel any pain? Okay, pain or tightness. So if I'm going forward and I feel a ton of tightness back here, that probably means that the reason I maybe lack my ankle mobility is due to some Achilles, some gastroc tightness. Maybe, I'm not able to actually keep that heel down because of something up the chain. The other thing we'll see is a block in the front where it feels like I could go farther, but there's something stopping me right here, and that could just be the talus and the calcaneus and those bones of the ankle actually not moving on each other. So a lot of times when you feel a block, that can be helped with some posterior banded work and stuff like that. And the other place people will feel it is up in the knee. So those 3 spots will tell us a little bit different a couple different things about why you might be having some ankle mobility issues. The most common one we see is that it's tightness in the back, and that gastroc and Achilles aren't letting us get there. Now, how does this affect the golf swing? With that, if we can't get into flexion and extension, with our knee, then we're missing out on the ability to push into the ground and actually drive. Now, do we need all that ankle dorsiflexion, meaning my knee going forward, for the golf swing? Not really, right? But having an ankle that can move in all planes and actually do what it's supposed to do is going to be most beneficial for my sport. Remember, we are screening for golf, but this also just applies for life. Okay, after we're done screening the ankle, we're gonna move on to our toe touch. So with toe touch, what we do is we're gonna have feet together, and I'm actually gonna turn this way. What we're looking for is, can you actually get down and touch your toes, which means, a lot of people think it's just go straight down and I can only get this far and that's all I can do, right? But to truly touch your toes, you need to clear the hips out of the way, so you push the hips back, okay? And then from here, we lengthen down and touch our toes, looking for minimal to no knee bend at all. So what we'll see is we'll start going high to the sky, pull ourselves down, clear our hip, push back, and touch our toes. Now, why is this important? It's important because when I go into a toe touch, I'm basically just going into a hinge position. So if I have a hard time clearing my hips and staying in that posterior tilt, then when I get in my setup position, I'm already too tight here. And what does too tight here mean? It means that when I come through the ball, I'm gonna try to get out of that tight feel. So I'm gonna try to pull my hips back to neutral, or back up this way. And what is that? That's early extension. So from here, instead of me keeping back here and just rotating my hips as I go down, I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna stand up to try to get out of that tilt, and I'm gonna fire at the ball, and then I lose all my space. I normally block it out right, or I throw my hands over and just duck hook it. So with the toe touch progression, what we're looking for is, can both legs actually stay perfectly straight when we go down? And if they can't, then we gotta test it one by one. Okay, so the way you test it one by one is you go, let's test my right leg locks out, left leg is basically just a little kickstand from here. And all I'm gonna do, reach up, pull both hands down towards the right. So you can see I can stay pretty straight. I can feel a lot of tension, a lot of fascial stretching there, but I can get down there. Now on the left side, we do the same thing, lock it out, kickstand, and come down, and that one's good as well, right? So if somebody fails the toe touch, you can see, okay, what side is it? A lot of times we'll have one side won't be able to get there, the other side can, but it gets held back. And what you see, what that looks like, is when they reach down, maybe this right one's limited and they'll kick kind of like this, right? So this knee will come forward a little bit and they won't be able to get down there. So the left can do it and the right can't do it. So with that, not only in the golf swing do you have a hard time actually staying in this posture, but then you transfer it to training and things like deadlifting and any type of hinging pattern. A single leg deadlift, a double leg deadlift is gonna be harder for us to elongate that muscle and actually get it back. So now training becomes an issue. So when you try to train and you see the deadlifts and I wanna do that, you actually don't have the ability to lengthen that hamstring, and now you're lifting with your low back, right? So right at the front of this video, I said that lower body or lack of lower body mobility can be the reason for that low back pain. It's not just from the swing, right? It can also just be in daily life, and now you're compounding that with the golf swing. Okay, last test that we're gonna look at is our hip rotation. So hip rotation, what we do is we've got this handy dandy tape on the floor. It tells us exactly what the angles need to be, but this is just the angle of the 5-iron. We're gonna go ahead and lock our right side out. We're gonna give our left a little kickstand again, just like we did for our toe touch, except now we're gonna see how do they rotate left and right. So if I'm here and I go ahead and push off to the right, I'm trying to get this hip to open up as much as I can. So this is going into internal rotation. If I go this way, it's external rotation. So what I'm looking to see when I'm going right is, can this hip actually rotate? Can I rotate into this hip? If I can't, then I have to get there a different way. So we're looking for right side, internal rotation, external rotation, and left side, internal rotation, external rotation. Okay, so the way we look at this from a golf standpoint is, if I'm a right-handed player, I'm looking at my right side backswing, right side downswing, left side backswing, left side downswing. Okay, and what we're looking for is to see if there's any asymmetries there. What we usually find for men most of the time is their external rotation, so going into their downswing on the right side or backswing on the left side, tends to be okay. Their internal rotation on both sides tends to be what limits them, so they don't have the ability to get heat. So if we were to do the test, what I would tell you is 2 points on your hips, 2 points on your shoulders. All 4 points need to move together. And then this club, I'll put it on your hip, and we're gonna see, does it carry this line? So this line on the ground right here, that's the angle we're looking to see. So if I get to here, obviously I didn't make the line, I'm not far enough. If I get to here, I'm in line with that, I'm good. Okay, and all the while, we wanna make sure that your big toe is stuck to the ground, your heel's still on the ground. So we will do this actually with shoes off. You can get a couple different kind of test results when the shoes go on because you can move in the shoes. So we'll normally do this when shoes off to get a true reading so that we can really attack the hips. So again, you'll go internal rotation on the right, external rotation on the right, then internal rotation and external rotation on the left. So what does it tell you is it tells you if that ball and socket can actually move the way it's supposed to. And if it can't, like I said, when we hit the brakes here and we got as far as we can make it, the only way to get back into our backswing is to turn that T-spine and lumbar spine or to side bend or do some type of reverse spine angle move where it's not as efficient, right? Remember, we want our hips to come here and then fire through. Here, fire through. So if we don't have the ability to rotate and stay on that swivel, we're gonna have a bad time. So from there, those are our 3 biggest tests. And the reason they're so big is because they look at the ground, so your interaction with the ground and the ankle. Then they look at the whole posterior chain, so glutes, hamstrings, calves, how do they all work together? And then we look at the joints themselves that actually rotate. So that's all the lower body mobility screening you would really need. Now, what we see is different combinations. So you've got your people who are not mobile at all, right? Posterior chain's gonna be locked up, ankles are gonna be locked up, hips are locked up in all directions. That person's actually not that hard to treat because they just need to mobilize everything. And then they need to train everything to keep that mobility. Where it gets a little tricky is when you've got someone who maybe has some trauma and on the right side they can't rotate, but the left side they can. So now we need to treat each side a little differently and get it caught up. But the big thing here is you just have to attack it with movements that make the pattern better. So if my ankles are really limited, what I can do is I can manually just do ankle pumps and try to get that to go, or I can load into a goblet squat and sit in the bottom for 5 seconds, giving myself active mobility with more weight. That'd be one way to train the ankles for ankle mobility in flexion, extension, dorsiflexion, and plantar flexion. Now, one way to train our posterior chain would be our toe touch progression, where we mess with your center of gravity and get you just extending through that. But once you have that down to where, okay, I can get pretty much as far as I want to go, then you can start to hinge and do single leg hinge work, double leg hinge work. And again, you're using weight to pull you into the rest of the good position to mobilize the whole posterior chain. The last thing is with the hips, you can do a whole plethora of things. You can do 90-90 sits, you can do windshield wipers, you can just basically get this hip moving in the joint, whether it's cars all the way around, which are controlled articular rotations. If you're doing those, you could do 90-90 sits, like I said. You could do hip rocks, just anything that's gonna make that hip open up and move the joint and move the actual fascia around the joint. That's what you wanna do, because hips that are stuck tend to be stuck because you work a job or you just sit here all day and then you think you can just go to the course and rotate. And without proper warm-ups, a lot of times that doesn't happen, and then we rotate through other directions. So we don't want to see that happening. So big thing is you're never going to know whether or not your lower body mobility is up to par. So you got to make sure you screen, and then when you do screen, you look at what is the issue and how can I treat that with movement. So you're never going to know unless you screen, and then from there, that training plan has to be on point.